I'm delighted to present to you today the Consumer Agenda, which is our vision for consumer protection to the end of the decade. Today is about the 450 million consumers across the EU that are at the core of the single market. Consumer spending now represents 51% of the EU's GDP. So consumer spending is the largest component of the European economy. And we know that confident consumers mean a healthy and dynamic economy for our single market. Today's agenda responds to the concerns and challenges faced by European consumers and businesses, from the surge in unfair online commercial practices and the exponential growth of e-commerce, remaining barriers to access cross-border goods and services in the single market, and to the high cost of living and the growing impact of climate change. Our consumer policy for the next 5 years is guided by the fact that consumer trust creates thriving markets and that consumer protection drives Europe's competitiveness and economic growth. Our consumer protection framework provides rules and incentives that create the trust, safeguards and legal certainty that benefit both consumers and businesses alike. In turbulent times of economic competition and geopolitical confrontation, the stability of our single market underpins the stability of our Union and the EU's competitiveness globally. And let me add that the new consumer agenda not only drives competitiveness, but sets simplification and administrative burden reduction as overarching priorities throughout. The agenda focuses on 4 priorities: removing obstacles for consumers in the single market, enhancing digital fairness and online consumer protection, fostering sustainable consumption, and strengthening enforcement of consumer rights. First, to remove obstacles for consumers in the single market, the agenda puts forward an action plan aimed at promoting cross-border access to goods, services and clean mobility. Consumers should be able to seamlessly reap the full benefits of our greatest single asset, the single market. And this is why our actions look at breaking down barriers when, for example, consumers book transnational rail services or try to access cross-border financial services. We will also focus on putting an end to other forms of discrimination based on nationality, place of residence or establishment. Second, we are committed to enhancing digital fairness and online consumer protection. The digital economy has delivered real benefits for consumers. It has opened doors to new products and services and reshaped daily life, from the way we shop to how we consume entertainment, how we access information and how we engage with businesses. As e-commerce continues to grow, new technologies develop and the use of AI becomes more widespread, we must ensure that EU consumer law continues to provide strong protection, safeguarding consumer autonomy and freedom of choice. And this is precisely why I will present next year a Digital Fairness Act. This Act is about protecting consumers online, simplifying rules, providing legal certainty and securing a level playing field for EU businesses. It will address practices that often manipulate consumers, making them spend more time online and more money than they originally intended. The Act will also respond to how minors are exposed to unfair commercial practices online. In addition to the Digital Fairness Act, we will look to strengthen fairness online by reinforcing the protection of consumers against online fraud, from stronger prevention to better support for victims in reclaiming their funds. Under the Digital Fairness pillar, we will also explore how digital solutions, such as digital labelling, may enhance access to product and service information for consumers while reducing the administrative burden for companies. We will further work to ensure the fair and transparent use of AI in consumer markets, in line with the AI Act and existing consumer and product safety rules. This includes making sure that our consumer protection framework keeps pace with technological developments and that consumers receive clear and transparent information when interacting with AI. Third, to foster sustainable consumption. The agenda outlines the measures taken by the Commission to further tackle greenwashing, early obsolescence and the lack of trustworthy information about product durability and repairability. It also sets out the rules introduced to make sustainable products more accessible, more affordable and also easier to repair. Our priority will be to effectively implement and enforce EU rules. Looking forward, we also want to continue working on the promotion of the circular economy, such as by fostering green by design features and by promoting the return of goods that are no longer used, second-hand markets or subscription-based products. And other important actions will also involve a better protection of consumers against forever chemicals, the so-called PFAS, or allowing consumers to switch to more sustainable transport modes. The last pillar of the agenda looks at strengthening the enforcement of our consumer rights. What we're seeing is an increase in unfair commercial practices and unsafe products sold online, which exposes consumers to risks but also exposes businesses to unfair competition. We've already made strides to address these issues, for example, with the recent agreement on removing the de minimis thresholds. However, there's more to be done, and I'd like to highlight two key deliverables. We will revise the Consumer Protection Cooperation Regulation next year. All companies who offer their products and services to EU consumers should be held to the same legal standards, regardless of whether they operate within or outside the EU. This revision of the CPC regulation aims to strengthen and simplify the enforcement framework for authorities and compliant traders, and to make enforcement of EU consumer law more effective, but also more of a deterrent. We're looking at more centralised investigation and sanctioning powers of consumer rights at EU level, as well as more support and better coordination among the national authorities. And through a more consistent application and interpretation of consumer protection rules, we will increase legal certainty and help businesses to lower their compliance costs, delivering simplification, ensuring a level playing field and also driving competitiveness. We will also propose a revision of the market surveillance regulation, which will explore further measures to make product safety enforcement more efficient and potentially establish an EU market surveillance authority. To conclude, our consumer policy delivers tangible benefits to EU citizens, and this is why we are responding to changes and challenges across markets, both online and offline. And this is why we are ensuring that rule setting is followed up through complete implementation and effective enforcement for the future of our consumer economy and indeed the EU's single market. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We can now open the floor to questions. Please, as always, before you ask your questions, state your name and the outlet you're working for. Maria.
Thank you very much. Maria Psara with FC Newspaper Greece. I believe you, and I believe all the good will to protect the consumers, etc. But the problem with these kind of announcements by the Commission is that it is too theoretical. You spoke about tangible benefits for the consumers. Could you please provide us some examples, some concrete examples that I could explain by writing in my newspaper to the Greek audience, for example, to the Greek readers? Thank you.
Sure, thank you for your question, and it's a very relevant one, because the truth is that consumer policy affords us in the institutions a great opportunity to really connect with citizens, because every citizen of the European Union, by one means or another, is a consumer or will be a consumer in time. And so what we have sought to do in the agenda is to lay out the actions that will make that practical difference to people. And under heading 1, which I think is a really important one, and it speaks to the other priorities that we have in seeking to implement the Draghi report and the Letter report, it's about making more of the EU single market. And this means that there is an obligation across the Commission, shared by myself and all of my colleagues, to advance files that will make life a little bit easier for consumers in the European Union, that will allow them to access goods and services throughout the European Union, where currently there may be barriers. And examples would include in the area of cross-border financial services, where consumers often find it very difficult, if not impossible, to make use of financial services products in another member state, even though they might be geographically quite close. Another area, I think, is in the transport area, where I know Commissioner Zizi Kostas and his colleagues in DG Move are very active. That's why we have proposed launching initiatives for multimodal digital mobility services, single digital booking and ticketing, and a targeted revision of rail passenger rights to enhance travel booking. So while these are examples that sit in other DGs, they are fundamentally consumer measures that will make a real difference, and so we will seek to provide impetus and momentum to all of these initiatives. Another couple of examples would be an initiative on cross-border car rental, which we know can be difficult for consumers, and also concluding roaming agreements with EU candidate countries. We know how popular the end of roaming charges was within the European Union. So can we extend that same arrangement to candidate countries, for example, Ukraine and Moldova as of January 2026, and the Western Balkans. So those are just some practical examples in the area of deepening the single market for consumers, but also for businesses. I would also point to what is a basic right, but one which all too often now is not being vindicated, and that is the right to purchase from your residence or your business in the European Union a product online that comes in from outside the European Union, or indeed that originates from the European Union. You have a legal right for that to be a safe product and a compliant product. And unfortunately, in all too many cases at the moment, that right is not being vindicated. And that is why we have a whole series of actions to step up enforcement with the existing tools we have, doing more joint product testing, for example, using the latest e-surveillance tools online to detect the availability of products online on platforms that may not meet minimum EU safety standards. And I stood here a few months ago with the annual SafetyGate report, and I held in my hands products that pose real dangers to health and even to life. So these are critical issues that I think are really important for consumers. And I recently visited China, as you know, and engaged with a number of the platforms and engaged with the Chinese authorities and ministers in the Chinese government. And my main message there was that if you're selling into the European market, and it is a very lucrative market for them and it's growing in scale, you must respect EU consumer protection rules and indeed our product safety standards. But in addition to fully utilising all of the existing tools, that is why I have highlighted in my remarks and in the agenda the need for a review of the Consumer Protection Cooperation Regulation, because at the moment the system we have of trying to coordinate through the Commission the actions of up to 27 different national consumer authorities for breaches that can be really complex, that can be cross-border in nature and very material. It's quite an unwieldy process, and it doesn't lead to great outcomes in general. And I think we need to improve that system, and I think the Commission should have a greater role for breaches above a certain threshold. So that's another example, I think, of what is set out in the agenda can mean in practical terms to help make life a little bit easier and a little bit safer and better for European consumers.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Yes, please.
Thanks, Commissioner. Anoop here from Euractiv. I have two questions. The first one being on the upcoming Digital Fairness Act. Could you provide a bit more clarity on how it would interact with the DSA that already exists? As you may have seen, on Monday there was a DSA evaluation report where one of the aspects it pointed out was that the problem of dark patterns was something that was already existing in multiple regulations, and this would be one area where the Commission would simplify in the future. So my question also as a follow-up was, then would the DFA look at dark patterns at all? Would you have any reflection on that? And then the second one was on the CPC reform. So as it was announced that it will be reformed next year, would the main, let's say, reform would be that now the Commission can actually start investigations? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the Digital Fairness Act is not a revision of the Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act covers a whole range of issues in the digital rulebook, as you know, including certain consumer protection issues. I think the first point to make is that its reach is limited to the companies that are in its scope, and that isn't all of them. And then the consumer protection elements of the DSA do not have the same depth as the horizontal consumer protection rulebook that we have that applies across the board. And so it has an important role to play, the DSA, but it doesn't have the full reach to where it needs to go to address important consumer protection issues. And the Digital Fairness Act will be proposed in Q4 of next year. It will focus on remaining gaps that are there in consumer protection legislation in the digital sphere. It will account for what is already in place and not duplicate any existing regulations. I think that's a key point. Dark patterns will be addressed as part of the Digital Fairness Act. Of course, we will take account of the other existing legislative references to dark patterns. But when we look at the digital fitness check that we published last year, we see very clear evidence of the harms that consumers are suffering, the detriment that they are experiencing online, including through dark patterns and addictive design, unfair personalisation and so on, and the other examples that were very clearly highlighted. So we are determined to get this proposal right because we do believe that there are gaps that need to be addressed. We also will use the DFA next year as a vehicle for certain simplification initiatives as well. And I would also make the point that for businesses who may be concerned about the proposal for a Digital Fairness Act, the alternative is that we see a growing level of fragmentation, because more and more member states are not just beginning to look at these issues that the DFA is intended to address, but they're beginning to legislate. And the last thing that any business in the European Union wants is to have to navigate up to 27 different regimes in relation to important consumer protection issues. And so if we can deal with them as part of the Digital Fairness Act next year, then that will help to remove that issue of fragmentation, which we know is a real scourge for businesses, because they want certainty, they want a level playing field throughout the European Union, and they want to know where they stand, and they want to know what the rules are, whether it be in Bulgaria, in France, or indeed in Ireland. What was the second question on the CPC reform?
It wasn't CPC, but maybe she can repeat.
I thought it was.
Just whether the reform is looking at the Commission to be able to start investigations.
Essentially, yes. We have to develop fully this proposal and engage with all of the services within the Commission, and we have ongoing engagement with the national authorities, the consumer protection authorities, who do good work with the resources and the powers that they have. But increasingly we are seeing cases that are becoming more and more complex, that require a lot of resources and expertise. And the truth is that there are different levels of resource and capability in the different authorities across the European Union. And increasingly the issues are inherently cross-border in nature. They affect many millions of European consumers across a number of member states. And so I think that the proposed revision of the CPC regulation should lead to the Commission having a greater and a more direct role in investigation and ultimately, where appropriate, in the area of enforcement.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, Marie Colin for Context. Thank you for the briefing. I have 3 questions on the DFA. So, first, the DFA was first announced beginning of 2026. Now it's postponed at the end of 2026, at the same time as the CPC regulation. So I was wondering if there is a link between the two. Then you say that the DFA was a vehicle for certain simplification measure. So my question is the DFA will be also in simplification package? You were there when the kind of simplification digital thing was just announced before. So I was wondering if DFA will contain some simplification measure or will be a simplification proposal in all, and also if the DFA will be part of the digital fitness check. And lastly, so in the communication on the consumer agenda, it's mentioned that minors are particularly vulnerable consumer. So I was wondering if that is a reference to the horizontal measure that was appointed in the consultation on DFA, proposing a revision of vulnerable consumer. Thank you.
Okay, I think you managed to get 4 questions in there. Well done. What I would say is that the DFA will be based on, in part, the fitness check that we have already completed, which was focused on the experience of consumers, and it was published in October of last year. So that provides us with a very strong evidential basis, and we have concluded an extensive public consultation. There was, unsurprisingly, a lot of interest among consumers, consumer organisations, but also companies who have views on the different issues that we set out in the consultation document. What I would say is that the DFA will be a consumer protection file, but will include some simplification measures. In relation to any link between the DFA and the reform of the CPC regulation, of course, they both sit in the same broad area of protecting consumers, enforcing their rights, but they don't have to travel together, in that they are distinct and separate initiatives. But I think they are complementary, because it is important that we have the tools and we have an enforcement mechanism that is fully fit for purpose, and I have identified that as being a key priority in the consumer area, and that's why I strongly believe that a review of the CPC regulation is required. And on the question of vulnerable consumers, we have mentioned that issue in relation to issues such as unfair personalisation. So there's nothing inherently wrong with personalised advertising or marketing, provided it's based on consent and is done within the rules. But where consumers have certain vulnerabilities, so it could be minors who are inherently more vulnerable anyway, or it could be the example of somebody who may have a gambling addiction issue, who then gets bombarded with gambling advertisements that in effect is targeting a vulnerability that they may have. So it is an issue we are going to consider as part of the Digital Fairness Act proposal.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. This was indeed 4 questions in one. We have one more question. Leo, please.
Thank you, Leo Lichtenvoet for Context as well. I have a follow-up question on the CPC, the review and the reform of the CPC regulation. So you mentioned the Commission having direct enforcement powers. The Commission can only directly enforce EU law that is directly applicable, meaning regulations. However, the current legal framework of consumer protection law is mainly based on directives. So does that mean that accompanying the CPC reform, you would also bring towards a reform of some of the consumer law directives to turn them into regulations? Or would the newly empowered CPC network or Commission, if it's the Commission who has this power, be only able to enforce a future Digital Fairness Act if it is a regulation? And also, by the way, I don't think the question has been asked, but will the DFA be a regulation? Thank you.
They're very good questions, but you're jumping ahead a little bit of where we are. So we are committing to doing the review of the CPC regulation. I've outlined what I think should be the outcome, the end destination of that, and of course we are engaging with the legal services of the Commission to make sure that we have an appropriate and solid legal basis for the revision and for any subsequent changes, and we'll have to take account of any consequential changes that arise from that. And in relation to the DFA, no decision has yet been made as to whether it will be a directive or a regulation. What matters to me is that we get it right and that it works and it actually makes a difference to help keep consumers safer online.